What are you doing back in New York City?
I am here for an Uber board meeting. So I've got board meetings for the next couple of days.
What does that entail?
I mean, it is exciting, but it's mostly, I mean, I mean, public boards all do the same thing. It's all governance and making sure that what these companies are saying they're doing, they're actually doing. So we do a lot of things like making sure that their financials are correct, understanding the strategy of the business moving forward. So, but it's great. And the businesses, I mean, we all use Uber every day. It has such a big impact on people. So it's been fun.
That's amazing. How many board members are there?
Maybe 9
Oh, not
of us.
small.
There's usually around in public boards, usually like 8 to 12 board members with most public companies.
Okay. Do you try to fill like a specific niche on the board, or you just like all kind of just do whatever needs to be done?
Well, I mean, it's so structured. Public boards are so structured, unlike, businesses, which are like much more creative. And so we've got kind of our roles to do. But the reason that people generally want me on their boards is because I ran a consumer internet tech business. And especially a business like Match and Tinder and OkCupid, where really were pretty transformational at the time of, when we launched these businesses. So a lot of people that they really want someone who's operated. And that's where I fit that hole.
Okay. You probably get like 1 million board invites, I would imagine. Hey, remember, it's permission to shine, so you don't have to be humble today.
Yeah.
You get to brag, okay?
Well, I think that there's not that many female tech leaders who've run public companies, so that part is helpful.
You're one of them.
Yeah. And then I think that I mean, there's a lot of people that want, people who have my profile. So I do hear from a lot of boards, but you can't be on 1 million of them. You really have to be pretty selective.
Are you on a few then?
I'm on a couple public boards, and then I'm on some private boards, but I'm on Uber, and then I'm on thredUP, which is a big marketplace for secondhand clothes.
These guys in the room will tell you, I'm constantly like, we need better like secondhand markets.
Yeah.
Like, especially for male, like I can't find good used clothes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason I joined that board is because the chairwoman, who's incredible, I worked with for a long time, said, you got to meet this founder. He's incredible. And he's so passionate about changing the world. And his big focus was environmental and really pushing against fast fashion and what was happening to the environment in the fast fashion industry. And so he created this thing, I don't know, a decade ago, and he's been at it really trying to change the world. And he's got a lot of conviction. So, and they went public a few years ago. So I joined their board a couple of years ago.
That's cool. Congratulations to them.
Yeah.
Mandy, I want to go back to your first month at business school at Wharton. What do you remember about it?
I have very funny stories that happened my first week of business school. And then not so funny, which we'll get into. But I remember that the first guy I met, I'm actually not even sure why I went to business school, other than the fact that I had a sister who went to Wharton to business school, and her friends were so interesting. And so I loved hearing their stories and what they were doing. And I was sort of bored at what I was doing in San Francisco. I was working at a PR agency, and I thought, I really don't want my boss's job or my boss's boss's job. And so after meeting all her friends, I thought, there's such interesting people there, and why don't I do this and study business? Because I've always been so fascinated by business. Anyway, first week, I meet this guy, and I said, so what are you doing here? Why are you at Wharton? And he said, I want to be the CEO of a Fortune 50 company. What do you want to do? And I realized, like, oh my God, I am in the wrong place. And that's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. Why do you want to be the CEO of a Fortune 50 company? And so anyway, I really did think I've made a terrible mistake. I'm not even sure what I'm doing here, because I don't know if this is like people that are like me. I mean, that was not true. But I also thought that people kept saying they were iBankers, and I thought they meant internet bankers. I didn't realize they meant investment bankers. And I was like, oh my God, I really in the wrong place, especially at Wharton. But I figured it out. But the first month was pretty trying. I had a 1-year-old. So I was a new mom, and I thought it was a perfectly brilliant time to go to business school. But when I started, my husband and I at the time moved from San Francisco to Philly to start business school. And we had actually lived in Israel prior to San Francisco. He's Israeli. And when I was in math camp, because I studied literature and English in undergrad, so I had to do all these math courses to make sure I was ready for business school. He sat down with me and said, we're not happy, and I'm going to move back to Israel. And so and I had like a baby, and I looked at him. I was like,
you have a 1-year-old.
Yeah. And I said, I don't know what happiness has to do with marriage, first of all. And second of all, what? And so it was, I mean, I found out who the bursar was. I didn't even know what a bursar was. And
what's a bursar?
It's the person you pay your money to at the schools. And I thought, I got to figure out a way to get out of this. Like, I already paid.
Well, you were going to bail on it.
I was going to bail because I thought there's no way I can do this by myself. And actually, kind of fortunately, it was too late. I couldn't get my money back. And so I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. And so I, powered through that, through business school, 2 years with a 1-year-old to 3-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
It's a little unexpected.
It says so much about your bravery. And I think that your whole story just will consistently show that theme. And then you go on to become CEO of Match Group.
Yeah, I mean, with a few sort of stages in between.
Few stops between.
Yeah.
So Match Group oversees 40 brands?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. It's at least dozens. So I got a phone call in 2005 from a recruiter. And she said, actually, she went to Stanford, and I had some friends that had gone to Stanford, and they said, well, Match is looking for someone in Dallas to run their startup called chemistry.com, which was a competitor to a site called eHarmony. I say site because at the time there's no apps. And eHarmony was starting to steal share from Match.com. So they wanted to create a flanker brand to go attack eHarmony, but they wanted someone who had real marketing experience. And at the core, I'm a marketer. I was a marketer. And so so she said, Match.com is based in Dallas, which I had no idea. It was based in Dallas. And I interviewed to be the GM of this startup called Chemistry. And at the time, in 2005, 2% of relationships were from dating businesses. And then sort of fast forward 15 years, which we'll talk about, 50% of relationships, actually it's more, it's probably 55% are from dating apps. And that's in Western Europe and the US. So, I mean, imagine going through that entire craziness over the course of 15 years and watching an entire category really shift and change the way that we get introduced to each other around the globe. And so anyway, but
quick question. Where do you think that percentage is headed in the next 15 years?
I think, my guess is that it's sort of maxing out in some places, like in North America and UK, which has a pretty high percentage of particularly young people. But I think that there's other places in the world where that we're still really early on in the curve, like places like India and South Korea and Japan and North Africa and Indonesia. So I think those markets, these developing markets, you'll see a huge rise just because it's the next. There's so much change happening in these countries where their parents had arranged marriages and the next generation is not meeting that way. And so we'll see that number rise over time, especially in those markets.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So anyway, I interviewed for this job at chemistry.com, and I had never run a business before. and I think like back then, I wish I could watch myself in the interview because I probably sounded so stupid. But
I don't believe that.
Yeah. I don't know. But they made a bet on me. And it really, I can't say I never looked back, but now looking back, it feels like it felt so hard. Every month, every year felt hard because these businesses were intense, and we ended up running. I can go through it, but I ran Chemistry.
What kind of revenue were they doing?
Like zero when I started, and we ran Chemistry to about 25 million in revenue. And at the time, Match.com was declining for 18 months. And the funny thing is, it was part of a company called Interactive Corp, and this is Barry Diller's company. And I remember being in that board meeting, and there was a belief, which is sort of it's hard to believe now, that the board sort of felt like, oh, is this dating thing maxed out? This is 2008. So It's like, is there really going to be a future in this online dating thing? It seems really small. Boy, were they wrong, were we all wrong. So I took over Match.com, which was a turnaround because it had been declining for 18 months. And so I did that for a number of years. And then subsequently, and we can get into it, but Tinder was incubated, part of an IAC incubation, and it was lightning in a bottle.
Was that a Barry kind of
Yeah,
baby?
I mean, it was. I mean, he created a mobile app incubator, and he hired people and said, okay, just like he does for a lot of the businesses that the management team owned, I think 20% of the business at the time, and so they really invested in mobile payments, a bunch of different things, and this was part of a hackathon. The team actually did a hackathon around this concept, around this Tinder concept, and it worked. And it started taking off in a pretty profound way. And so so that was sort of a sister company. I wasn't involved in Tinder, especially at the beginning, but Tinder got incubated. And then over the course of the decade that, 14 years I was there, we bought OkCupid. We bought a company called Plenty of Fish. We were highly acquisitive. We bought a business in Europe and a couple businesses in Asia and Hinge, which is based in New York. And so there was, so we not only were we highly acquisitive, but we also really focused on how do we grow our existing businesses. And so I started out with this little thing, which is zero revenue. And, by the end we were a couple thousand people and we were operating in every place in the world. So, it sounds so flippant now when I say it, but it felt like, I cover my hair, it's gray, and I earned every one of those gray hairs.
How do you manage that stress? Like, that's something that we were talking about when we had a phone call. You're like, I was stressed all the time. I don't know if you still are or not, but I feel like a lot of us face that, high achievers, it's like the stress can really weigh on us, especially when you start not being able to sleep. That's the worst. Did you have anything that helped you manage it?
Well, I remember it was so funny when I took over Match.com and then I got a new boss. And my new boss, who I spent a lot of years working with him and for him, and he was so intense. He'd come down from New York, and he actually had not really run a business before. The guy's brilliant, but he was so intense that all night long I would grit my teeth. And so I'd wake up in the mornings. I woke up in the morning, I could barely move my mouth. And so I was stressed. And we had a lot to prove. And frankly, when you think about these businesses, they sound so easy sort of after the fact, but we fought like tirelessly for every percentage of growth. And it was an intense environment. There's no way we were going to get where we were today if it wasn't. But looking back, it's just incredible. I feel so grateful because it's such an interesting category, and everyone wants to tell me either. I actually was in Miami this past weekend, and I sat next to a person at a event, and she said, "I met my husband on Tinder, and my sister met her husband on Tinder, and we got married the same year." So
wow,
and it was when I was there. So
what a difference maker!
Yeah.
Like you're really making an impact.
Oh yeah,
in a big way.
Yeah, if it weren't for these dating apps, so many people have said there's no way we would have met the guy, the girl, and I wouldn't be married today. I wouldn't have this kid today. And so it is definitely the new way to meet.
Yeah, I'm 28, right? And so many of our friends have gotten married through the dating apps.
Yeah,
it's very much so a real part of our culture.
Yeah.
Do you think the stress is worth it? Everything that you've done, and you're certainly going to continue to do so many extraordinary things, but I'm curious, like, if you look back, is it worth it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Nice. Totally. The balance is as you get older, is just making sure that you just take care enough of yourself that you don't, because it's not great to not take care of yourself and be stressed and not sleep and to be running on adrenaline. But I do it all over again. I would do it in a heartbeat. It was a fun ride. Not always fun.
I can see it in your eyes.
It was a fun ride. Oh, believe me, there's times where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get up in the morning and do this again. But for the most part, that's the thing. Like running a public company is just there's so much coming at you, and so that sort of resilience piece. And I can't say I was level-headed. And I'm sure my kids were like, "Oh, we remembered when you were running the public company. You yelled at us all the time." But I think that the ability to be resilient under pressure is not. It's not a given. Like it's not an. I don't know if you develop that or if you're born with it, but you can sort of see it. There's some people that have it and some people that don't.
What was the market cap of Match Group when you were CEO?
Well, when we went public, it was about 6 billion. But when it was a wild ride. And don't forget, like I also was there during the crazy sort of bump of COVID, or like that's right when I left. So I think it was over 25 billion when I left. It sort of come
Whoa.
back down to earth. But it was, yeah, it was. I mean, it did better than any of us expected, including our investors. So
I think a big part of that success is your ability to build incredible teams, and especially teams of just badass women, and I think that's something I'm so inspired by. And I'm curious how you find these people and how you convince them to come and work for you and with you.
I don't know if I told you when we were sort of catching up when we first met each other a few weeks ago. Did I tell you I got sued?
No.
Oh, this is such a good story. So truly the way most of the people I hired is because I worked with them. I knew them. So it was hiring a known quantity, sort of, because none of us had been doing these jobs before. But I worked for a company called thredUP Technologies out of business school. So out of business school, the market was a disaster. It was 2001. There were no jobs to be had. I had a 3-year-old. My mom was dying of cancer. I was like, oh shit, I got to get back home. I moved back to Dallas, no jobs. And I was sweating bullets. I ended up getting a job at a software company where I did a summer internship called i2 Technology. This company, which no one knows about now, but it was this tech darling, and it hired all of its engineers from IIT, which is like, think about MIT on steroids. I think 1 out of 1 million people get accepted to IIT in India. And so this incredible engineering talent. And I was running marketing at the company and met a group of just, incredible, well, friends, executives, but friends. Actually, we weren't executives. We were sort of, I don't know what we were doing, but we were not like senior executives by any stretch of the imagination. And my husband, actually, it was all of his group of friends that I got to know really well because he and I met at work. We met the old-fashioned way.
At I2.
At I2. So I feel so grateful because if I hadn't gone to I2, I wouldn't have my child. I wouldn't have like my relationship now, and I wouldn't have my closest friend. And I don't think that Match would have been nearly as successful as it was because it was those people that actually drove a huge amount of the success at Match Group. But anyway, back to like the story about getting sued. So I got hired by chemistry.com. I really had no idea what I was doing.
How old were you at that point?
I was like maybe 34, 35, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I finished business school at 30 or 31. And this was like 4 years later, 4 or 5 years later. So like mid 30s. So I get there and I realize it's a tech company and we need product and tech people. And I didn't have anyone to run product. And these companies truly are, they're product driven companies. So engineering and product are the core of these companies, the heartbeat of these companies. And I didn't have anyone who was running product for us at chemistry. So I call my friend Shar Dubey, who's amazing. And I said, hey, Shar, I'm looking for someone to run product because I think I can figure out like marketing and I can take out the trash and I can do all sorts of other stuff that I have to do at this little startup. And I can figure out email marketing, but I need someone to run product and help me figure out the engineering side. I said, do you know anyone? Honestly, I never thought in a million years that a day later she would call me and said, I'll do it. And I was like, really? I was like, do you know how to do it? She's like, no, but I'll figure it out. It's like, okay. So Shar came and interviewed with my boss at the time. And he's like, okay, I mean, she seems really smart, but she knows nothing about this, but I hope you guys can figure it out. Good luck. Kind of, it's like, okay. And boy, did we figure it out. But what had happened is there was such a brain drain from i2 Technologies, this company I worked at, and the CEO said at the time, the next person who hires anyone, I'm going to personally bankrupt. And that person was me, which was so stupid. And it's like even a crazier story because I did not solicit her in all honesty. Now looking back, it's 20 years later or whatever it's been. And so I get sued. But the crazy thing is my husband was working there and he was running like the consulting group within the company. I mean, he had a big job at the company and he was working on a lot of revenue. And so I did what any normal human being would do. I picked up the phone and I called the new CEO. I knew the chairman really well, but the new CEO who I'd worked for. And I said, hey, can we please meet? Because you're suing me and my husband. I don't even think we were married. I think we were about to get married. I think it was like we were about to get married like a month later. And so I said, my fiance is you're suing me, but like we're getting married. So you probably shouldn't sue someone who works at your company. And he had come, so we went and had a drink, which also feels like, the old fashioned way of actually having a conversation instead of just everyone suing everyone. So he gave me a piece of paper and he said, if you sign this, I'll drop the lawsuit, which by the way, you couldn't uphold a non-solicitation lawsuit. I mean, in Texas or many places. And also I actually didn't even try to hire her. So he said, I will drop the lawsuit if your husband commits to being at the company for 2 years. I was like, or fiance. And I looked at him, I'm like, that's like indentured labor. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, I realized you realize I actually can't even ask him to do that. And the fact that you did is like not great. Like, that's just not a great signal. And so he quit the next day. Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's funny. I mean, yeah. So he quit the next day. And I think the company, of course, said, Shar must be really good because they're suing you. This is great. Who else can you hire? And so I think I signed a piece of paper saying I wouldn't hire anyone for like a year, and then I hired a bunch of people after that. So, but those people were like incredible because
hire people from I2?
I2, yeah.
Okay.
So I hired there was a bunch of people that came. The guy who ran strategy is brilliant. The guy who ran technology for a long time, he's still at Match Group. He came over. So we just had some incredible talent. But the most important talent was Shar, because she and I created this partnership that was, it kind of defies gravity. Like, most people in their life won't find someone that can have a perfectly just complementary partner. It's unusual. And so, but we struck this incredible balance between our sort of personalities and skill set that I think made the business really successful.
Mm-hmm. There's an incredible Fortune article about you too, right?
Yeah.
Then I would encourage everyone to go read that. It's very inspiring.
Yeah. Well, it's just, and what I'd say to people who are listening is that, there's times in your life where you find these people that you just have incredible ability to work and just do amazing things in the business environment. And I would hold on to those people as long as you can, because it's just not, it doesn't come along easily.
So in these rock stars that you've hired and gotten to work with, what are some of the common attributes between them?
Well, it's so funny because we did this management meeting where we barely did these offsites. We took this management meeting. We were in this big room with all these people that I had hired and brought in. And what I did not realize, because we had to go into 4 corners based on our personality types and how we dealt with stress, or I can't remember exactly what it was. And I realized I was the only one sitting in the corner, and then everyone else is in another corner. So clearly I hired people not like me. But it really, a lot of them, most of them were a lot of engineers, obviously, and highly analytical problem solvers. More sort of, there was the left brain and the right brain. Most of these guys were truly engineering problem solvers. But I mean, I think that I had the advantage of I got to see people and I knew how good some of these people were. And that's the thing. It's a bit of a crapshoot when you hire people you don't know or haven't worked with. And so I had the luxury of bringing in people I knew.
And you've done it really well. One thing that I'm excited to talk about is I always struggle to try to decide where do I put the line between professional and personal life, right? Because I'm an open human being, right? I got a big heart. I just kind of wanted it to all be one. And I'm curious how you've navigated that throughout your successful career.
Look, it's so hard because when those early days of Match or chemistry, I mean, we were working around the clock. I spent way more time with people at work than I did, my own family. And so those lines get really blurred. And especially when you're young and you're in this kind of startup mode.
Did you love that? You're
fun.
Hustling and partying.
It's fun. I mean, I was a little bit older. So, I mean, some of these other startups where everyone's in their 20s. That wasn't my situation. So it was a little different. But I will tell you, it gets tricky because when you're so hands-on operating and you have daily stand-ups, for example. I mean, this is the day where like no one worked remotely. There was no such thing. So we were all in the office and every day we had a daily stand-up. We talk about the metrics of the business, the whole company.
What company is this again?
This was chemistry. I mean, we actually did it for Match too, but you had a couple hundred people and we're all sitting in Dallas and we would be in like the big conference room and we'd sit around we'd write the metrics on the board and we'd say, what's getting propped today? What's happening today with this release? Who's doing what? Are we doing anything on the PR side? So we'd have a 30-minute, 15-minute stand-up. What we call them, these stand-up. They're like rapid fire meetings. And so because the reason we did it is because when I took over Match, people were like, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing. People will be finger pointing like crazy. And I was like, forget it. We're all getting in the same room and everyone cannot complain about not knowing all the shit that's going on because you're going to hear it every morning. And so if you don't go to the meeting, you won't know, but it's going to be there for you. So it actually was really quite effective, but it got tricky because, for those of us who were running the business, we were like, it was the DNA. Like we were there. You could feel us, see us. We were present, people walking around, problem solving in the meetings. And then, I had like some health stuff I was dealing with, and I was sort of faced with like, how do I disappear to deal with my health stuff?
What kind of health stuff?
Well, I've been really public about it, but so my mother passed away actually 20 years ago today.
It's today?
Yeah. It's crazy.
Aww.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully she's looking down.
Yeah, I know. She is.
I'm sure she gave you a lot.
Yeah, she did. But she was fun. She was petite and tough.
She's very driven.
I don't know, driven, but she had very high expectations for her daughters. So
I'd say you exceeded.
Yeah, I know. She didn't. She would have been a little shocked because I was a little bit wild as a kid. But
we need to go. Okay, bookmark that.
Yeah. So I think she perceived I was wild. I'm not sure I was as wild as she thought, but she was the opposite of wild.
Like sneaking out or like?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
To go do what? Like make out with boys or?
I mean, like all of the above. I don't know. But I was playing really competitive sports, so I wasn't that crazy. But I definitely optimized for fun. And I just thought, like, why would you not optimize for fun? That doesn't make any sense to me.
It's the point of life.
I know. I like this is crazy. Anyway, but my mom died of ovarian cancer, and she had a genetic defect called BRCA1, which creates a high propensity for ovarian cancer and breast cancer, which she had both. And then my aunt passed away, and my grandmother and great aunt, and everyone died by like in their young 60s. For as long as as many generations as we know about. And so my mom, 20 years ago, and the day right before she died, I said to her, her oncologist, I said, and she suffered for like 5 years. I mean, she fought the disease for 5 years. And I said, do you have a blood test? Can we do that like genetic test that I just heard about? And he looks up in the office and there's one kit left. And he drew my mother's blood. She passed away the next day. And he called me 2 weeks later and he said, you've got he said, your mother tested positive for the gene. We need to get you tested. And so, I tested positive for the genetic defect. And I watched my mom and my aunt, who I was really close to, both pass away. And so when
like a year.
They passed away within, I think within little over a year, but yes, they both died, quite young. And so I had this choice, and I kind of found out about all this stuff right around the time I was joining, a little bit after I joined Match. And I told my boss at the time, and it was very funny, his reaction. And I said, listen, I think I've got to do these preventive surgeries because my propensity for breast and ovarian cancer are really high.
Like 90%.
Yeah. I mean, the breast cancer is very high. Ovarian cancer can be high too. And it's a bit of once you sort of find it, it could maybe be too late. It's not great. You do not want to get ovarian cancer. You can help it. So, and I knew that, I'd had, actually, I'm not even sure. Oh, no, I hadn't had a kid. So I was waiting to have a kid before I did all these surgeries. I forgot. In the middle of all this, I had a kid, which Your
second kid.
I had my second kid. Yeah. So she was born in 2008. So she was born in 2008, which is another story. But anyway, when I told him about this, he said to me, he had a friend who tested positive. His friend's wife tested positive for BRCA. had cancer and was fighting cancer. And he said to me, I just saw him recently, but he's like, he looked at me, he says, "You should do the cancers. You're much better off alive to me than dead." And I was like, yeah, I probably should do I probably should do all these surgeries, not, to make sure I, reduce my risk of cancer. And so he actually said, you really should take care of it. It's not like, don't mess around with it. He said, and we'll cover for you. Don't worry. We'll figure it out. Because I was worried. I mean, at the time, I had just gotten the bigger Match job. I had just had a kid, and I thought, like, how am I going to take off and have a preventive, mastectomy and go through this surgery. And, but I did it. And,
Were you just worried about?
well, I like taking time off. We were working 24/7 all the time. And I was like, oh God, how am I going to take time off to go do this? I don't have time for this. But I ended up doing the surgeries, and I had to tell people, because I didn't want to tell people. I didn't want to not tell people, because I was going to be gone for a couple weeks, because I didn't want them to like, why the hell's Mandy disappeared? And then I didn't want them to think I had cancer, because I didn't have cancer. Although they found precancerous cells, but I didn't have cancer. I didn't have to fight cancer. And so I had to sort of tell this, in the middle of my startup, I'm like, guys, I just wanted you to know I'm going and having these surgeries. I'll be back.
Was that a hard
decision
fine to make? To tell them?
Oh, I just didn't know that. I just didn't know the alternative. I just thought that, like, if I don't say anything, because people know I'm a bit like you, like an open book, it'd be weird. And then I couldn't sort of reconcile how to do that. But what I didn't realize is, by talking about it, I normalized a lot of the sort of health issues in the company. And there's a woman who she's amazing. She's in our marketing department. She's still there at Match Group, and she had premature twins. And she said, like, one of the reasons that she has been at Match all these years, because, when all this happened, she went into premature labor. I was like, take whatever time you need. Don't worry about it. And I had just gone through all my health battles, and she just said, I knew the company would do the right thing and take care of me. And so I just think we sort of set the tone. It's like, look, this is like, we're human. And if you got to go take care of things, and the stuff you have, the stuff comes first. And so I do think that we did change the culture. I didn't mean to, but we changed the culture by talking about these things.
Good for you. Do you feel like there's added pressure because you're a female?
It was funny because Shar and I, who ran the company together, we were the two most senior people at the company. We'd be in a meeting, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's my daughter calling me for the third time. Could you just give me a minute? And I think people would watch us and say, like, they're human, and they've got kids, who, get sick or call them or get stressed. And so I think that, we always worked, and the bar was held high, and we wanted to win, but people also saw that side of us too. And I don't think you really see that. Most of my male friends are CEOs, frankly, have wives who stay home, and they don't really worry about their kids on a day-to-day basis. But we as moms, I don't care who you are, at like any level, like we, even as CEOs, we're thinking about our kids, like, if they're sick at home, it's very top of mind. Mm-hmm. And so I think people did see that. And I do think that they saw that we could be human and also be competitive and fierce business people too.
Mm-hmm. That's great. One thing I'm really curious about is the pay audit that you conducted. You're the first female CEO to conduct a pay audit. And I'm really bought into that, right? Like making sure that everyone is getting paid equally and we're not dividing based on gender. I think that's horrible. What did you find amidst that audit?
Well, it's funny, when I started at Match, it was Match.com at the time. It was so small. It was like, my team was 25 people, and it became 200 people at Match. So when I went from chemistry, which is
like Match Group people, or Match.com?
Well, there was no such thing as Match Group at that time. It was just one brand.
Okay.
So it was Match.com was the very only brand that we had. It was all North America. And so, and it was in Dallas, and there was 200 people, and that was it. So it was relatively small-ish company. Mm-hmm. But what I realized, and Shar and I talk a lot about it, I realized when it came to compensation time, we'd often see that men were squeakier than the women, and they would bang their fist on the table a little bit more when it came to comp. And there was one individual, she was incredible. She was never, ever going to ask about comp. She was never going to ask for money. And, and you could start to see like early on, I'm like, I just didn't, I was not comfortable that she wasn't sort of keeping up with her peers because she would never bang her fist on the table. And actually, it's this one woman, and my sort of attitude about pay, it was really influenced by her because she's just a person, like, by the way, Shar hates asking for money too. So, and my mother, by the way, growing up always said, Amanda, if you want something, open up your mouth and ask. What's the worst can happen? They could say no. But most women aren't like that. And
It's a great lesson.
yeah. And so, and people just don't like it. It creates a lot of like stress and tension. And so at that point, Shar and I started saying, let's just make sure that as we are looking at, this is 2008. Let's just make sure that we factor that in, that it's all around the impact that people are having, not how squeaky they're being. And so we were deliberate. And so through all those years, as we looked at compensation every year, we would really think a lot about, we would look at the bands. There's so few people I could tell. Like, you had the product team, there's 10 people. I could see what everyone was paid. You have the marketing team. There was 10 people. I could see what they're paid. You have engineers. And so we did it sort of like in our head, and we calibrated, we sort of had personal calibration. As the company got bigger, it's thousands of people now. We needed much more of a process and a system in place. And so we did this audit, and I really was actually a little nervous because I think that we're doing a good job, but we hired an independent auditor. They came in, and there's a little areas that actually was like on the edge. You're like, yeah, you got to focus on this little piece of the business. People have been there a long time. They just haven't been promoted, like people coming in who are male. And I was like, oh God, let's fix that. But for the most part, we were paying people pretty much based on the role that they had. We were paying men and women the same. But we had to make sure that not only were we going to continue to measure it, but we had to keep reporting it and then holding ourselves accountable. It just seems so obvious. And hello, I was a woman. Of course it should be. But I think that there's now the technology sector, there's I think a lot more awareness and probably a lot more equity than there's been, at least when I started.
A lot of people listening to this are leaders in their own right. I think 60% of my listeners are female, so 40% male. And I think we all have a place to just bringing more equality to the workplace and to life, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on like how we can all contribute to creating that environment and like standing up for that bullshit when we see it?
It's true. Like, the thing is that I think most tech organizations are much more aware, and they talk about this in a way, and even at like the board level, we talk about it. And we look at things like the percentage of leaders who are women, and we track it to see are we making progress, and we're reporting it. So honestly, I feel like for the young people listening to this, we did a lot of hard work. But there's always more work.
Thank you, Mandy.
But there's always more work to be done. Right? Like I say this all the time. Fast forward 50 years, I think more women are going to be running companies because I think they're great leaders. And I think that, we're going to see a lot of the change in the world. My daughter's in medical school, and I think there's 55% of something like that, more girls in medical school than there are, and more women than men. And if you look 100 years ago, it certainly was not that way. And so I just think that tech, engineering, AI, some of these parts of the business, they will shift and change over time. But we just have to, your generation and the generation below you has just got to make sure that, we need more female engineers.
We absolutely do. What do you think is the most exciting application of AI that we'll see moving forward?
I think that's easy, because we've just talking about women's health and about, propensity for, sort of cancer. I think health and education are the two most exciting areas. And it's just hard for us to even think about it today. But the idea that you get diagnosed with cancer, to be able to automatically have cases and doctors and patients being connected with a click of the mouse it's really compelling. And I do think that, for example, I'm an advisor for a company called Flow, which is a period tracking app. And people track their periods. Girls track their periods. And when they notice things that are off, or the app notices things that are off, they'll raise it to them. Like, you're spotting, you need to probably go get a pap smear. So these are small things, and this is all now self-reported. But if you imagine with big data sets, we have the ability to, predict if people are going to get sick, or
Predictive is
if
so
they
interesting.
are going to get sick, or if they do get cancer, how do we catch it early, and then how do we treat it? And so I'm very bullish on that front. And then I do think education. I mean, it's really, I joined a nonprofit board. It's a school system in North Texas with 23,000 students. I think 85% of them will be first generation kids that go to college. And I think the ability for us to help kids improve, their math skills and reading skills with AI is going to be pretty powerful.
Amen.
I'm positive and I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably a lot of other things that AI is a little scary, but I just think that these are the two areas that it can really change people's lives.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Whenever I study all these CEOs, right? And whenever I hear about their kind of responsibilities, it's always like, you got to be very forward thinking. But then I'm also like, you probably have all these fires that you have to put out. So it's like, how do you balance the day to day while also maintaining this forward looking mindset?
I will tell you, from a consumer tech perspective, I think it is one of the hardest things to do, because you have to innovate. I mean, we felt we had to innovate or die. And that sort of innovator's dilemma, if we weren't innovating, then we really felt like we will go out of business. And what our view was, because we had so many brands, we're like, look, we know every brand's not going to be relevant for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But if we can constantly figure out a way to innovate in the category, even if it means putting ourselves out of business with some brands, didn't matter. Because as we know, the consumer, things are happening so fast. And think about, like, I look at my behavior on buying things or using online on devices or social media versus my 15-year-old daughter. It is way different. And so in a very short period of time, if you think about that young consumer and what they're doing, how they're buying, how they're interacting with their friends, if you're not innovating and not being useful to them in some capacity, then you don't really have a reason to survive. But the question is, like, how do you do it is a really hard thing. And I think a lot of tech CEOs struggle with this, because the question is, can you innovate within an existing brand that's sort of like, old, like your parents' dating app? Do you have to have a new brand? And we can talk about how we did it, but it was something that we talked about a lot, because, if you didn't have that DNA in an organization, then it's game over.
So for instance, you see somebody like Facebook says, hey, we're going to come out with a dating platform. Does your strategy now change, or it's like, hey, stay focused, everyone. Let's keep doing, we've already got our plan in place?
Well, the crazy thing is, when I became the public company CEO, my first earnings call. And the thing is, I knew how to run a business, but I'd really not spent time on the IR side and with investors. I was nervous.
IR being investor relations.
Yes, sorry, IR being investor relations, and talking to the market and talking to analysts and talking to investors. And it's just a different muscle, and I had never done it, so I was scared shitless. And so the first earnings call, I had the script written out. I rehearsed it. I was like so nervous about it. And by God, 2 days or a day before the earnings call, which was like my first big, call that I was going to speak about the business, Facebook announces they were launching a dating service, and the stock plummeted like 30%. And I remember yeah, I was like, oh God. So I had printed that like matrix print, or the printer was going, and I just printed my final script. And then I heard someone say, Mandy, you better look at your email. It was like someone outside, and I looked, and someone had sent me that they had just launched. And I picked up that piece of paper and I ripped it in half. I threw it. I just threw it all. It's like papers everywhere in my office. And I said, we got to start over again. But Facebook is a good example of this is one of those big behemoths that like they were not good at dating. And also people didn't want to, I mean, we realized that we thought that. In fact, I went and looked at the first script I wrote talking about that, and it said, like, we don't think that people are going to want to expose themselves on Facebook. That's different. That's for your friends.
It's too close.
Well, and it's like Facebook was for your friends or your friends of friends, and dating is not like that. I mean, you really don't want to go and actually publish who you that's something you want to do a little bit more private. You don't
Keep them
want really,
separate.
yeah. I mean, do you really want your aunt knowing you're dating or who you're dating? I mean,
Hell
yeah.
no.
So that was our we believe that it would not be a huge competitive threat. It hasn't been. So many years later, but the innovation piece is really important. So I mean, we did a lot of things in the company, not just innovating within the product itself, but things like hackathons or ideathons where you actually didn't have to code. And so we had teams around the world that were getting together and presenting to a group of people ideas, and we do it every year. And so we'd actually have probably 30 ideas that we'd actually present, and some of those ideas stuck, and some of the teams would go out and incubate those ideas. And sometimes they would be incubated on their own, or sometimes like a video dating concept, or like gamification dating, or sometimes they would be put in the product itself. But if people thought about them a lot, and actually we gave people real freedom for those period of a week or two to really focus on creativity and try to get sort of outside the box in terms of the day-to-day, because the day-to-day can be a grind and you don't have enough time to really think about how should we be thinking about the business, a year from now or 2 years from now.
What do you think it's like to work for you?
Well, I know that people like working for me because I got a lot of people I worked with them at I2, and then I got a lot of people to come to Match Group, and then I was a pretty good recruiter.
Says a
I
lot.
think, well, what I'll tell you is I think that if people are talented, worked hard, and knew their shit, I think it was great. I'm not sure it was intense, and we were very focused on results.
But like you specifically, they'd be like, hey, she like calls me all the time, or she's like very supportive. She moves barriers for me. She's always asking me these questions that I didn't expect.
Well, it was so funny because I think that Shar and I officed next to each other for, I don't know how, the 14 years that I was there. And we had a very different way of managing people, which is kind of fascinating. I would make big bets on people, and then I really believed in those people, and they knew it. And look, you got to back your people, and if you don't believe in them, then they shouldn't be working there. So they knew it, and also, it's funny. I grew up playing soccer, and I loved, like, I didn't need to score the goal, but I love seeing people win. I mean, I loved winning, but I love seeing other people on the team just kill it on the field. And I think I brought that with me to a work environment. I love seeing people do really well and getting promoted, and and having an idea that came to fruition, and that really drove me. And I think people knew that. But Shar was so funny because she and I would talk about this all the time, because we've always said, you work for a person, not a company. And so you might work for an amazing company, but an asshole boss.
So true.
Or you might work for kind of a shitty company, but if you have a great boss you can learn from, kind of doesn't matter. Depending on, where you are in your age and life stage. But anyways, and I definitely wanted to be someone that people wanted to work for, because it's hard. I mean, every person in that building would get up every day, and, it was up to me in some ways to like set the tone and pace that they felt like they can really succeed.
They're probably not going to sprint farther or faster than their leader,
Yeah.
right? You do set that pace.
Yeah. But Char and I had this really funny thing. So she's like, she always used to claim she didn't like managing people, but she's brilliant at it. I mean, she's such a great leader, but she always liked managing a process. She's like, if I can solve a problem with people and bring people along with me, then that's much easier than managing the people. For me, I did a little differently. I knew of these like incredible superstars, and then I would really trying to figure out a way to empower people and make them successful. And then I think that, people, honestly, it's funny because, not that I'm name dropping, but Jack Welch was not on our board, but he was an advisor. And he always used to say, which it's not like he just told me this, but he said, love them when they come in and love them when they go out.
Mm.
And it's really true. I mean, you really have to treat people, of course, well when they're coming in, because you're in the honeymoon phase. But if it doesn't work out, you just have to be really respectful and kind as you sort of transition people out of the business. I don't think I was so afraid of letting people go. And anytime you let people go, people are like, oh, thank God. It's often you'll hear like they were the weak link. that did not make sense. And so I was never afraid of that. And it was funny because throughout my career, I saw these like kind of tough guys that hated that. They just didn't like, I mean, who likes that? No one likes that. But they couldn't bring themselves to like confront, someone when it came to, like putting them on a review or transitioning them out of the business. And I just felt like it came with the territory. Not to say that I didn't let people go and cry sometimes, and I was letting them go if we ever had rifts. But I do think that people knew I had their back. Mm-hmm. And I think that's ultimately what makes it a great boss, because if you're constantly questioning or undermining someone, they can't be successful.
Mm-hmm. This says a lot about you, Mandy. It makes me super thankful to be sitting here talking with you. Do you have any specific tactics that you'd use when those people would not work out or be a right fit for your team to get them out of the organization?
I'd fire them.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, I think.
But how would you fire them?
Well, for performance, I think just being really transparent. Like you have to be transparent, and you just have to say, like, here's what you do well, but you're just not hitting the mark on these things, and let's try to figure this out. And if not, then, we'll figure out a transition. How
do you know that the timing of it's probably the trickiest thing for everybody, right? Like when you do this development plan, you try to turn them around, but how do you know when it's time to just cut the loss?
Look, it's, it wasn't a very big company. You couldn't really hide, and you either had to really perform or you just sort of didn't last. And look, no one wants to be in an organization where they're not feeling supported.
You kind of know, right?
Yeah. And also, what you hear from people all the time is that it's actually more respectful to have someone leave earlier than later, because why would you want someone in an organization where that people don't respect them or they can't be successful? Mm-hmm. It's not good for them. Mm.
What else in life do you want to accomplish? You've already done so much. You're still so young. What else is on your bucket list?
I am just in my first inning. What are you talking about?
That's what I mean. What else is there?
It's funny. I left sort of thinking that I was going to take a little break, and it was such a weird time because I resigned in January or February of 2020, so right before the pandemic. And so I didn't realize I would be taking such a big break at the time because, the whole world was just, frozen. But I thought I'll probably end up jumping back into an operating job. It's funny, Shar and I spent a lot of years apart because she subsequently ran the business. She stepped down too, but she subsequently ran the business and did a great job. And she's like, great, you leave, and now I have to run the company from my kitchen. So I never, from my kitchen, because literally she was running the business from her kitchen because no one was in the office. So I feel like I dodged a little bit of bullet because I've never run a company where a huge chunk of people work remotely. That was not how it worked. And, January 2020 when I left, it's crazy that in a short period of time, sort of how we work has changed and where we work has changed. But anyway, I think Shar and I realized how much we missed each other. And so one of the things that I wanted to do is figure out a way to work with her because the partnership was it was great. We had a lot of fun. And so I thought I'm probably going to get an operating job, take a little time off. I moved to Italy also, which was pretty epic.
Where?
We moved to Florence for about a year and a half.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was way better than I thought it would be. I don't know what my expectations are, but it was way better than I thought it would be. It was great. And
now you're bringing balance and you're building a house in India.
Well, yeah. My husband's from India and his family's there, so he's got to figure out in particular a way to spend a lot more time there. And me too. I love my in-laws, and so he is. Yes, we're building a house in India, and we'll figure out how much time. But India is such an interesting market right now, and so it's sort of fun to have a foot in India, where you're seeing just, what's happening in the economy and the workforce and the growth of that country is just insane. So it's fun to sort of, I feel like I'm a little on the sidelines, but he's a little less on the sideline, but getting closer to that is going to be fun over the next decade. So I thought, I was like, okay, I'll take an operating job. I haven't found anything that it's sort of pulled me out of what I'm doing now. And I found that I actually really like being on boards and working with entrepreneurs more than I thought I would. And then Shar and I joined a private equity firm to look at stuff together, figure out how we can jump into a business together in some capacity. And so I'm having fun, but I feel like this is just I don't know, I kind of feel like it's just the beginning. But I am honestly taking care of myself a hell of a lot better than I did when I was running a company.
You're getting swole.
Yeah,
You're lifting weights these days.
I am lifting weights. I am. I'm kind of loving it. Yeah. So I am. I'm getting stronger. I feel like I like the best years are ahead. So these people are like,
So
oh, I'm getting
proud.
so old. And I was like, what do you mean you're getting old? Like, what are you talking about? So I'm going to stay young forever.
The world needs more Mandy
Yeah.
Ginsbergs.
I'm wired that way for sure.
What do you wish I would have asked you that I haven't?
I think you started to ask me about being a woman in tech, and and it was a really interesting time because this was a time where also there's a lot of sensitivity around how women are treated in the workforce during this tenure, and so you didn't ask me about that, and I think that's important because I think that look, even I have to be really honest with you. I actually have never been in a particularly uncomfortable situation, although I definitely have heard comments, and I'll talk a little bit how I've dealt with
Please.
weird comments. But I will tell you, I work with a lot of women on boards who are maybe 5 to 10 years older for me, and some of their stories I'm like unbelievable. It's like, thank you for like paving the way for me, because I think that they also, some of the inappropriateness that they saw, some 10 years ahead of me who are in their mid 60s, they just saw a lot of stuff that is just, I was like, wow, that, it's amazing what you had to sort of endure to become as incredibly successful as you were. But I think, look, I mean, I'm young in my career. If someone would make a comment, and I'm not saying it's what you should do or it would work for people, but I would sort of use humor. I mean, like, someone would make a comment about some woman's legs. I was like, pull up let me see, show me your ankles. I want to see your legs. Like, I think I would never let it rest.
No, you have to create the boundary.
But I would tease people or make fun of them if there were things that were said inappropriate. I didn't actually realize I did this until as I was getting older and I was talking about the situations that came my way. I'm like, God, I did not realize that was my tact young in my career. But I had like funny things like, so one of the stories I've told, and I don't know if I've told it on a podcast, but I'll tell you the story. So I mentioned Jack Welch. And this story really stuck with me. So he was an advisor. He came to a lot of board meetings. He loved the dating category. I mean, I don't know, like himself, but he liked,
Is Jack Welch out there swiping?
I know. I shouldn't say that. But anyway, but he was a big supporter of the work we were doing with Match, and it was an exciting time. And so he knew who I was. So I had a board meeting, and this is when we were part of Interactive Corp, and I presented. And the business we were at the stage where actually things were really starting to turn around. So it was really exciting. It was a great board meeting. And the next day, there's a smaller group that met in a conference room. And at the time, the guy I worked with had texted me and said, hey, can you bring in, I showed him some piece of paper the day before. I said, sure. So I'm in, jeans and flip-flops, my hair in a ponytail because I wasn't in a board meeting and I was running an internet company. And I walked in, I gave him the piece of paper, and Jack Welch said, he looked at me and he said, can you get me a cup of coffee? And I was running a $250 million business at the time. And there's maybe 5 or 6 people around the table.
They all were like, stop breathing.
Everyone was so shocked. And I was like, and I just walked out the door. And as I walked out of the door of the conference room, there's so many assistants at that building. There's like 4 of them. They're like, Mandy, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I was like, yeah. Jack Welch just asked me to get him coffee. And they're like, what? We can get him coffee. But right as I was telling him that, Jack Welch comes running out of the room. He says, I didn't realize it was you, Mandy. Of course I know who you are. He knew who I was. And I said, I know, I get it. And thank you for coming out and apologizing. Because they all, of course, probably looked at him after I left and be like, what the hell? It's like, she just presented us our plans for how we're going to like double the business. And he said, I'm really sorry. And I said, well, you wouldn't have done that if I was a guy. And he said, no, I wouldn't have. I'm really sorry. And so, I was glad he said something, and I did. Sometimes you think about things to say afterwards, and I did say,
You checked it.
Yeah, I did say you wouldn't have said that if I was a guy, and kind of we made a joke about it, but those are the things that I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, that was 2008, 2009. And 15 years later, I mean, I just think there's just a much different level of awareness. And also, what's appropriate in the workforce. I mean, we saw startups, so there's like really bad behavior. And I often say that there needs to be more mothers running technology companies, because if you're a mom and you're making these rules for your kids and these girls, like you're not going to put up with bad behavior. And I think that I really do actually think we need more moms running technology companies. And so, look, one of the things when I took over Tinder, there was a lot of like sort of bad culture, bad behavior, and I just said, guys, we're not, ain't happening on my watch, not doing it. And I think that setting those boundaries, moms are pretty good at that. And so I think we need more of them.
More moms in the tech world.
More moms in the tech world.
I love that.
Yeah.
Anything else we can do to continue to push that rate of innovation and change?
Look, the more women who are, Char and I talk about this a lot. I think 40% of our leaders were women. It was easy for us because we could go recruit people, because they looked at us and say, I want to work with people like you guys, and I can see myself in your shoes 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And the more women you have, the easier it is to recruit them. So I think it's a matter of time, but there's just incredibly talented, by the way, incredibly talented men too. But I just think that, for many years, women have been overlooked, and I think that's changing. So I don't know, women, like, keep going to business school, keep going to engineering school, keep putting yourself out there, and, lean in.
Yeah. It's funny. I noticed I'm close with my sister, and I'll see a job posting and it's like, oh, you need 10 years of experience. And I'm like, I'll still go for it. Right. I'll be able to make up for it. And my sister, and she sees something and it's like 3 years of experience, and she's got like 2.9 years of experience. And she's like, well, I can't go for it.
Yes.
Like, we got to like,
can I tell you that, that this also correlates to women and men in dating? I'm going to use huge generalizations here, but it's kind of true. Women will not overshoot. Like, they'll be really practical and realistic when they reach out to people or like people or swipe on people. Men don't. They don't. They're like, they'll just go for it, even though it's a bad idea. And they're honestly out of your league. But
Mandy,
I know.
Oh,
but I do, not yours, but I do think that is.
You can be real with me.
Yeah, that is. I mean, you do you do see that. And it was funny. There's a board role years ago that I was talking to this recruiter, and I said, okay, well, how can I add value, and am I going to be very valuable to the board, and what are they looking for? And she said, it's so funny, because she says, I've been looking for a woman for this particular role. And I usually interview a host of people, but there's just less women public company board members. And so she said, it's so funny, because so many women are like, that I've talked to, are like, oh, how can I add value? And the men are like, what's the dynamics? How much money can I make? And so I said, do you think that's really true? She's like, anecdotally, yes. So I just think that, again, things are going to change, but we also have to teach our girls to, open up their mouth and ask.
Yep. Amen.
It's so funny, because I learned a lot about personality through chemistry.com, because we worked with this incredible biological anthropologist named Helen Fisher, Dr. Helen Fisher. She was known for putting people madly in love in an MRI machine, but she started to work with us because the question we posed to her is like, do opposites attract, like birds of a feather flock together, or do opposites attract? Like, how do you what's the science behind chemistry? She created a personality test, and she called people 4 different personality types based on how much dopamine, serotonin, estrogen, and testosterone you have. Now, we're all a mix of all these things, but we all sort of know that high testosterone person, or the high dopamine person that jumps out of airplanes and like moves across the world and takes on a job. And then the people who would never do that, they're like maybe high serotonin, that like the stability and like knowing their routine every single day. And so while we're a mix of all these things, there's some personality types that are more extreme than others. And so Helen, she taught us a lot about this. So we actually had, 20 million people take this personality test, and we matched people through the algorithms that, based on personality. And what we found is that, first of all, it's not that people don't date people. There's just bigger challenges. And I found, when it goes back to optimizing fun, so my mom was sort of like a high serotonin person. She was very rules-based. She had the same schedule every week. She liked to be really organized. She liked to do the same thing. And so I was so wired. I'm a kind of a high dopamine person. And I was so wired differently that, like, she thought I was being a rebel. I'm like, I'm just optimizing for fun. I'm actually not going against you. I'm literally trying to optimize for fun. And so I did. But I think that it's really understanding your personality type, because that also informs how you work with others, how you date others, and how you live with others. And so
the match.
Yes. Yeah. And just making sure you understand what you're up against, or the benefits when you're even at work. And honestly, it'll be interesting as your podcast is, starting to roar, you'll realize that, like, some people you can identify with, and you can probably identify with them because, or maybe you're going to be allergic to some CEOs you talk to because they're so different from you. And so understanding that, I think, is really important in connecting with other humans.
Nice. Well said. I hope this could be like a place for everyone too, Like, I hope I can get people on here who I disagree with, right? And people from all walks of life. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Yeah. We've got to get you out of here because you have dinner tonight.
Yeah.
With whom?
I actually have dinner with a friend of mine from childhood. We, the last time we were in school together was in 8th grade. So, so she is going to cook with me. So
You're cooking tonight in New York City?
She's going to cook. But after that, I'm meeting, when I was in Florence, I was telling you this before we started. I think anywhere you go in the world, there's so many incredible people to meet, because we were talking about some of your upcoming travel. I was like, bring all your equipment you're going to find the most fascinating people. But when I was in Florence, that city punches way above its weight in terms of people, because it's a small city, but there's incredible people there. And I became friends with a woman who was a diplomat there, and then another friend of mine who is the CEO now of Madewell. And she's fantastic. And she just took over Madewell recently. And so we get together and we talk about the world. My friend who's a diplomat is now living in Jordan, and the woman who's CEO of Madewell is living in New York. And so it's just fun because we talk about our personal lives, our professional lives, and this interconnectivity. It all sort of started in Florence. And it kind of goes back to, like, investing in those friendships and people that when you cross paths with people that you really connect with, take the time to show up.
Yeah. You've really reminded me how important relationships are. You said you're not hiring the people who all had honors, right? You're hiring the people who have these attributes and these just strong personalities, analytical abilities.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Mandy, thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you, and it seriously means the world that you took the time.
Well, good luck to you on all your future interview endeavors and some of the travel coming up. So you're gonna have to, like, weave that into some of your storytelling on these podcasts too.
We're definitely going to try. Okay. Thank you, Mandy.